Well, welcome everyone to a Rural Prep Professional Development webinar. We're very pleased to have you with us today. I'm Randy Longenecker, a professor of family medicine and assistant dean for rural and underserved programs at Ohio University, Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine, and associate project director for Rural Prep. And I'm joined by my co-host, Davis Patterson, who is project director of Rural Prep from the University of Washington. And we're really pleased to have Dr. John Wheat with us. I'm going to, in spite of all of his titles, I'm going to call him John because he and I go back a long ways. And we're just really pleased that he's with us today to talk about the pipeline. And we want to welcome all of you and thank all of you for joining us today. After a brief introduction, John will lead us in a presentation on today's topic. And then we will take time to allow you as an audience to participate. That will be led by Davis. And if you have questions at any time during this webinar, please feel free to enter them in the chat. We'll try to address those during the discussion time. Rural Prep is the collaborative for rural primary care research, education, and practice. It's a grant-funded project and a collaboration between the University of Washington as the lead organization and the University of North Dakota and the Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine. We are funded by HRSA, and anything we say today is our opinion and not theirs. Our mission and focus is to improve and sustain rural health through community engagement and research in rural primary care, health professions education. And we do that in a variety of ways. This is part of our attempt to develop a community of practice in rural medical education and to, in particular, address some of the professional development needs of rural faculty, program directors, and such. And we include nurse practitioners and PAs in our definition of primary care. This is a professional development webinar. We even welcome students and residents to participate. We're all learners together. We do this 4 times a year. This is the second event in this academic year, and generally it's on the 4th Thursday. The 4th Thursday this year happens to be Christmas Eve, so we are doing this a week early. And here are the objectives that you've seen in the publicity around our webinar today. We really want to talk about the pipeline and what role each of us has in our local place of work. This is not just an abstract concept that a few researchers like John and Davis and I tackle. It's really for all of us to address. So hopefully that's what will come out of our time together today. So without further ado, while John is sharing his screen, I'll just say a couple things about him. He and I have known each other for about 20 years, ever since we both became involved with the Rural Medical Educators and served as co-chairs of that group for the National Rural Health Association. And I've been to visit him in Alabama twice and just really enjoy the interactions we have together. He and I have had several, many perhaps, discussions about the pipeline as a metaphor in rural medical education. It's been very useful metaphor, and John has contributed greatly to the conversation around that. And so without saying anything further, John, you can tell the rest of your story if you'd like. It's all yours.
Randy, thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I always look forward to having a conversation with our colleagues in rural medical education. I want to discuss with you today supporting medical education reforms through data and local advocacy for rural pipelines. I would like you to know that there's some questions that have motivated my academic inquiry through the years, but currently I am enthralled by what factors are associated with rural and minority students not becoming medical students, and what accounts for the decay in intention to become a rural doctor while in medical school. Well, I set out on this exploration of rural health leaders pipelines as a demonstration project back in 1990 with both colleagues in the community and with academic colleagues here. At that time, Alabama was awash with health professional shortage areas, as it is today. If there's a color on that map, it's a health professional shortage area, as you guys recognize, and the whole state by and large is there. We listened to the colleagues in rural Alabama of all ilks in medicine and without, and their unified message to us was this, that we don't need missionaries or mercenaries. We need our own kids in medicine. We listened to that, and later we had the opportunity to get data to address that supposition a little bit. And this is in short what we found. We found that in the counties of the state of Alabama, that those counties that got a more dense presence of students from their county in the medical school, they also had a denser set of primary care physicians, and they also had longer life expectancy. If you look down at the box at the lower left, their percent of rural population, it had a negative impact on both the number of students in medical school and on the number of primary care physicians. The relationship between students, doctors, and life expectancy remained, yet those in rural areas have to work harder to see that, that relationship come to fruition. That's how we looked at that. Well, the colleagues in rural Alabama said, well, why don't we grow our own using that pipeline concept we hear about? And so this became the basis for our Rural Health Leaders Pipeline Demonstration and Evaluation Research Project that we articulated and planned back in early 1990s. This is the model we used. It's centralized on rural communities, getting students into programs of education that lead to the health professions, particularly medicine. We were concerned about medicine at that time more than any other. There's several steps that you can take, of course, to get through and get out and to return into practice to home. And we, even at that time, made the decision that we needed to keep these kids in contact and as close to their community as possible throughout this whole process, including use of AHEX, preceptors, extension service, and so on. And there was recognition that there needed to be something to help fortify their intention to become rural practitioners. And so we worked and were able to get scholarships provided by the state to help these students to find it feasible and practical and even useful to go back home to practice. Now, the first program that we started in the pipeline started our beginning of our pipeline, and that's the Rural Health Scholars Program. It began in 1993 after much planning. It is a summer term after their 11th grade in which they get to earn college courses and get to explore healthcare careers. And you can see at the map there that we have covered the state very well during the past 25 or so years. Well, with the success of that program in 1996, we had advocacy from the communities and from the parents and from the students, and the Dean of the School of Medicine says, hey, I'm going to authorize you guys to start a rural medicine program now. So we started a 5-year program that started in the year after college to earn a master's in rural community health plus 4 years of medical school. So it's a 5-year program. And we covered the state by and large with this over the years. But notice at the lower half of the state that that there's a strip through there that's not very well as represented others. This is what's known as the Black Belt of Alabama, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Well, the Rural Medical Scholars Program has commanded a lot of attention, both at the policy level in Alabama, at the medical school, and the colleagues around the United States in rural medical education have rewarded us with interest and have helped evaluate it 2 or 3 times. And we did several evaluations and published those, but this is sort of the ultimate evaluation publication that we got out of this. So it was completed or reported in 2018. It's educating physicians for rural America, validating successes, and identifying remaining challenges. And this is the figure in the book that really kind of tells the story. You can see that rural medical scholars are represented by dots and stars. The dots is where they came from. The stars are where they went into practice. And this was completed after about 13 or 14 years. So the numbers are not as big as they have become, but the story remains the same, that this dark strip through the area known as the Black Belt, 17 counties, has only 3 dots and 1 star. So that's something that we needed to address. If we looked at the statistical data from the study, we can see that we had 3 groups of people that we were comparing. We had students that were admitted by regular admissions to the main campus in Birmingham. We had those that were admitted by regular admissions to the branch campuses or regional campus at Huntsville and Tuscaloosa. And we had students admitted by special admissions and with the special curriculum to the Rural Medical Scholars Program at the Tuscaloosa Regional Campus. Look at the bottom, you can see the relative effectiveness of these programs in odds ratios. Main campus is a 1. The regular students on the regional campuses is a 2.5, which was very significant. And the Rural Medical Scholars Program on the Tuscaloosa campus was 6.4, which also was very, very significant. These results were conclusive in the institution and around, and it resulted in the institutionalization of the Rural Medical Scholars Program and its expansion, such that it is now conducted on both the Tuscaloosa campus and the Huntsville campus. Well, there was the lacking or the problem we noticed, the challenge we noticed in the previous map showing the Black Belt was not represented well by the Rural Medical Scholars Program. So we began to address that with the Rural Minority Health Scholars Program, which we started in 2000. It's a summer term, very similar to the Rural Health Scholars Program, but it is conducted after the 12th grade as a early pre-admission program to college. And again, it has course credits that they can earn, and it also has further exposure to healthcare careers. And you can see from the map that it is heavily populated by students from in and around the Black Belt area of Alabama. And the colored counties there are the counties that in 2000, the governor of Alabama proclaimed to be the most risk target Black Belt counties. Our unpublished observations of this program is that many rural Black students access the earlier pipeline programs, but few entered the Rural Medical Scholars Program. It turns out that many of the minority rural health scholars in high school then become rural minority health scholars at that early entry program and to college, but they don't make it into the Rural Medical Scholars Program very frequently. Barriers include the MCAT and cultural dissonance that affect medical school entry and completion. What will it take to produce and sustain culturally consonant doctors for the Black Belt became a question that has really occupied our minds now for about the past 5 to 8 years. Which brings us to our discussion focus today of pipeline programs can support reforms in medical education through the engagement of community leaders. This study is really a summary of the effects of these three pipeline programs that we have. We start out by showing the distribution of both the outcomes and the programs throughout Alabama. We are studying counties, so the statistics that we show here relate to each county. Look at the outcomes in the upper left circle or donut there, and you'll see FP is equal to the family physicians that enter into the county from the pipeline. Health professionals are the health professionals from a county that are produced by the pipeline. And the total professionals are all professionals for a county that's produced by the pipeline. And if you look over at the top right side, you can see that we've dealt now with 70 family physicians that have gone into a county from the pipeline, 216 health professionals produced, and 228 total professionals produced. If you look, now, the question is, how did we come up with those numbers other than just counting? Well, we tried to show this distribution in columns 1 through 6. So if you look at column 1 there at the top for family physicians produced, you can see that there were 29 counties that didn't have a family physician come into them from the pipeline. There were 21 counties in column 2 that had 1. There were 8 in column 3 counties that had 2 come to them. So if you take these numbers and multiply 21 times 1, 8 times 2, 7 times 3, and so on, and add up those products, you'll get 70. And it works that way all the way down through all of these outcomes and exposures. And as you see at the bottom, there are the exposures. Rural medical scholars, look over at the right, we've had 230 rural medical scholars. Rural minority health scholars, only 179, because it started much later and it only included 40 counties, and we're studying counties. So only 2/3 of our subjects are available to study for this one. And you look at rural health scholars, and we've had 642. Now, we needed to organize these data for statistical operations. So as per usual, we looked at the different variables. We have the outcome variables that we talked about. We have the exposure variables that we talked about, but we added independent variables that we felt had a good chance of having some impact on the outcomes aside from our intervention or exposure variables. And those have to do with rurality, poverty, and percent Black. Now, this is the meat of our findings. This is the statistical results of all the operations. Our strategy for this, for coming to this point, was to seek variables that would go into a statistical model to explain the variance that occurred in the outcomes. So we used multivariable linear statistical modeling. And we took as the first I want to talk about is family physicians that come into a county. We looked for a statistical model to explain the percent of family physicians going into a county from the program best. So we started out in a 5-step series. So you look at the first model under family practice down there, and it's a control model. So we wanted first to put in the control variables into the model to see how much of the variance in family practice was explained. And you can see we put in poverty and percent Black and percent rural, and look at the far right at that little right lower corner, and you can see that it explained only 2%, 0.02, of the variance, which is the R square is what that's called. And so we said, okay, that's how much the control variance. Let's see if the rural health scholars add to that. So you can see the next level down there, rural health scholar model, and we put in the control variables, and then we added rural health scholars as a variable, and lo and behold, it bumped the R square, or the variance explained, up to 17%. That's not too shabby. We then said, okay, well, let's see what the Rural Minority Health Scholars model shows. We did the exact same procedures. We added Rural Medical Scholars Program. Rural Medical Scholars Program did not add anything beyond what the control variables were. We said, okay, let's look at Rural Medical Scholars model. We put in the control variables. Then you can see under Rural Medical Scholars, we added that, and the R square, or variance explained, jumped up to 33%, a full third of the distribution of family physicians back into the county program was explained by this. And so we then said, okay, let's clean up this model and make it the best model it can be. And so we said, let's remove any variable from the model that does not make a significant contribution in a statistical sense. And so poverty, percent Black, percent rural, they dropped out. The only significant variable that remained was Rural Medical Scholars Program, and it retained a 30% explanation of the variance. And now I want you to look at under Rural Medical Scholars column down at the bottom, where it shows a B, or a beta coefficient, of 0.24 and the p-value of less than 0.001. Well, referring to the beta coefficient of 0.24, that indicates that for each rural medical scholar that a county put into our program, 0.24 of a family physician was attracted back to the county from the program. Or in other words, 4 rural medical scholars from a county led to, in the future, 1 family physician. So these same operations were completed for both the health professions outcome and for the total professionals outcome. And it turns out that in both of those models, that the Rural Health Scholars Program played the preeminent role. And you can see that the outcomes for the total professional model showed a R square of 0.35, and for the health profession, 0.31. And since we're interested in the health professions, mainly I'm going to say, look at the beta coefficient under Rural Health Scholars Program for the health professionals model, right above family practice model there. And you can see that the beta coefficient of 0.20 indicates that for 5 rural health scholars, a county produced 1 health professional. Pretty busy slide, but it tells a lot. Now, so to summarize our findings from all this, the family practice model showed for every 4 rural medical scholars from a county, the county gained 1 family physician. The health professionals model showed that for every 5 rural health scholars, a county produced 1 health professional from amongst these various health professionals that we know are all needed in rural communities. We propose, or we think that this way of articulating the effect of the programs will appeal to county officials and local officials who say, hey, if we work to get more of our kids in these programs, we're going to get more out of them. So that brings us to discussion and what are the future directions for these kind of developments. What will it take to get rural medical program classes like this in the quest for health, rural health equity, particularly in Alabama? So if we took that Rural Medical Scholars Program data that I talked to you about first, and then this Rural Health Leaders Pipeline data that we just looked at together, then counties gain family medicine physicians and produce other health professionals in proportion to the number of students they place in pipeline programs. But Black Belt counties place fewer students in the Rural Medical Scholars Program. And thus they get fewer physicians out. Systematic changes are required to nurture the potential in becoming physicians among these students from the Black Belt and very similar cultural backgrounds. And this is the really the bottom line that we were seeking is engaging local leadership. Local leadership is required both to encourage students in healthcare careers, and then also in advocating for programs to nurture their dreams, including pipelines and other reforms in medical education, such as admissions and where the curriculum is conducted in the community or in a city, and what is the content of the curriculum. So our demonstration research used concepts that this 2012 review found to be important. Our findings, in fact, lend support to the hypotheses that these concepts are valid. And these are the concepts, 6 concepts they came up with, and 4 of them are those that we feel like our experience and research support. Take the perspective of the targeted population, which I hope you've seen we have even from the start. Include a comprehensive pipeline model, which was the central focus of this effort. Build in family and community engagement throughout, and make tracking and evaluation data an integral component. So based on what we've learned and seen all these years, we call on rural medical educators to act locally and involve community leadership, including pipelines as part of your armamentarium. We propose and call on you to collaborate globally, and we call on you to then use the influence that you generate through all this to make changes that are needed for rural health equity. And I would be remiss if I did not also acknowledge the good work of colleagues, our colleagues, many of whom are on this conference call today, with these just published research about pipelines and to pathways that to produce a rural workforce, and also about promoting health careers among rural K-12 students. And with that, I will come to a close, but let you know that if you find it would be useful to get in touch with me for any reason outside this conversation or to follow up this conversation, this is how you get me. With that, I expect my colleagues, Randall and Davis, to guide me in answering questions.
Well, thank you so much, John, for a really good presentation. We've come to the time where we want to engage you as an audience and have a conversation. If you haven't already put something in the chat box, please feel free to do so and send your question to all panelists and attendees. So, Davis, you want to begin the conversation?
You bet. And I just wanted to note to our attendees that I pasted links to those 2 publications of ours that John highlighted. Thanks, John, for calling attention to those. And in fact, I wish we'd had one of your articles about your for our K through 16 article before we had done our lit review there, because it's one of the few articles that actually, your article is one of the few ones that does a really rigorous job at looking at sort of the K through 16 pathway and kind of evaluating what happens there. But we'll talk about that a little more later. What I thought, there are a number of questions in the chat box, and some of them are clarifying, and some of them I think would be good to start out with, and then I'll throw in some questions of my own later. But the first one I wanted to have you address, we have a question about your earlier comment about cultural dissonance. So curious to know, what you meant by cultural dissonance, and when you were talking about the students from the Black Belt area.
Yes, well, what we have found is that there is a mismatch in both values, expectations, and methods of accomplishing things from the students that come from our more white culture and those that come from Black culture. And there's also a mismatch between the expectations and values of rural kids versus the general medical school. And we have found particularly that there's a lot of effort required to help rural kids, Caucasian kids, to fit with the expectations of the metrocentric medical school. And we find that there's even a greater distance between the rural minority kids and so on. And so, for example, we'll have a minority rural kid whose family and their community associations are everything in their life. And they get the opportunity to get into medical school, and then something happens at home, and that's their top priority. That's where, and so that's just one example of that kind of dissonance. On the other hand, when these kids are seeking to get into school, there's really not an appreciation typically of an admissions committee, of a traditional admissions committee, for those kind of factors in a minority kid's life. And so what would seem to be somebody that's unsophisticated, that may have trouble adapting, et cetera, that can affect decisions about the kids too. So it's very basic, and it is must be addressed in any strategy that hopes to be successful in increasing the number of rural minority students in health professions.
All right. And
that's
we have a
opinion.
couple. Yeah, sure. Well, actually, maybe I'll follow that up with, how do you address, and I've heard you talk about this, and I've heard others talk about this before, about the, family needs is a big issue, particularly for families that are poorer and have more, economic disruption or health issues. All kinds of things can come up. Are there ways to help address those? What kinds of supports can we give to students who, are facing family issues?
Well, at the macro level, the medical institution must recognize this as an issue and must prepare for it. And that's where this great thrust throughout higher education now toward the diversity climate is being addressed. So that must be addressed, and there has to be people in the system that these students trust and are willing to lay down the burden of their lives to, and say, how can we handle this? And there must be, on the other side of the desk, there's got to be someone who says, yes, we have these resources and things that we will pull together, whether it's helping you study for a test, whether it's finding resources because your fiance had a car wreck and it is now kept you where you don't have a ride, all these various things. So that's the major thing. Over the long haul, though, I think it is going to require structural changes such that the community in which these kids come from has to have a leading voice in guiding the institution on how to support and how to nurture our students through, so that they become physicians and become parts of our community without losing them either from failure of some sort or because they get brain drained off to the community, out of the community.
Okay. Well, thank you. There's a couple of questions related to your medical school and or even university level resources in Alabama. One related to historically Black colleges, and if there are medical school affiliations, or maybe that's a pipeline, a source of pipeline potential. And then the other one related to, the osteopathic, the Alabama College of Osteopathic Medicine, and if that might have had any effect on your outcomes. And so, what's the connection there? So maybe if you can kind of address the other higher ed resources in your state and how those might contribute.
Yes, certainly we have several HBCUs in the state, and many of those, virtually all of them, have students who would like to become health professionals, would like to become physicians. And they serve a great purpose because many of these students, particularly from the Black Belt, have never had the opportunity to have a white person in school with them coming through. Even though we've had, the civil rights changes and all, the white flight into private schools has left the Black Belt essentially segregated. And competing with kids that come from families that have resources to go to a private school, that's a pretty daunting task. And so they find that going to the HBCUs is very important socially, to feel good about themselves and to begin to transition from what is considered by many and is a substandard education. And it is, and there's reasons for it. But in any event, the HBCU that are there, they're serving good purpose, they attract good kids. But through the history, there has been, again, the search for stars from rural folks, looking for these very bright ones that can make it, as opposed to there's a bunch of good kids from around the rural, and they're in these HBCUs. And, if we paid special attention to them, perhaps give them longer to get there, perhaps work with those schools to put together tracts and pipelines. That is an idea that has been bandied about. And I think that the School of Medicine has begun to make some outreach into one or two such HBCUs. Personally, the Rural Medical Scholars Program and the Rural Medicine Program at Huntsville, our sister now, have done a good job of recruiting from those areas. But as far as having a contract or an agreement, we have not done so yet. But that, I think, is a very fundamental part of the collaboration that needs to be enacted in order to go where we need to go. Moving on to osteopathic medicine. The DO schools, we have two now, not only ACOM, but also the one at Auburn. We have two DO schools, and they came in, and this is now John Wheat speaking. I'm not speaking for any institution or anything like that. They came in with the promise that any rural kid that could cut the mustard would be able to get into medical school and would come back to their home communities and would take care of business. What we have seen, and some of us projected, was that yes, students would find it easier in some ways to get into these schools because they were competing at a little bit lower level in terms of MCAT preparation. This MCAT is just atrocious. But anyway, they get in, but these are private schools and you have to have some coins to be able to stay there through. And so we don't see near the Black Belt students getting into those schools as we would have hoped. They're just as many and more maybe than getting into the University of Alabama School of Medicine or into the South Alabama, but still it's not making an impact there. And so it's my personal opinion that this is a state responsibility to take care of its people, and it needs to focus on its populations and needs to do what it takes. And so I hope that answers the question.
Mm-hmm.
It raises questions of funding. There have been a number of questions about, so how does this all get paid for? Perhaps you could address that.
The funding for conducting the Rural Health Scholars started first based on the interest of the rural constituencies of the state, which had helped pass a law that created the Family Practice Rural Health Board that had some limited amount of funds to give out each year. And this idea caught their attention and they began to fund it. I think it was about $100,000 a year for a while. And after 3 or 4 years, they said, our job is not to fund things for perpetuity because we only have a limited budget. We need to find a way to get funding aside from that now for a institutionalized program. There was one of our students whose father ended up getting elected to the legislature and who was placed in the Education Trust Fund Committee, and he liked it. And he led the charge to get funding placed for that program forever. And so then we started the Rural Medical Scholars Program next, and it received the same aplomb, and it too was included in the perpetuity clause. And then at about the same time, the colleagues that were advising us became influential in the Medical Association, and the Medical Association said, we're going to go to work and advocate to get scholarships to pay for these kids' school all the way through medical school for free if they sign on the dotted line that they will go into rural practice, and if they don't go, they'll pay back this money 3 times over. And so that has had a major positive impact, and that's where we've gotten to so far.
You know, on that funding question too, I mean, that's great that you have that support in your state. And I was a bit intrigued by your focus on the county level in that study, and it may be, you know, data availability or what, but I want to ask you a little bit about that, but I also wanted to mention too, just in terms of state and federal funding for rural health professional education. We talk a little bit about that in our K through 16 article that you mentioned, particularly because of the shift from HRSA away from pipeline program funding through the AHECs, the Area Health Education Centers. And I wondered if you could comment on, are the AHECs involved, or do you have an AHEC involved in the work that you're doing with these programs in Alabama?
We have a very rudimentary AHEC in Alabama. I did much of my early training in North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where we had just a ACE #1 AHEC, and I got my ideas from that. But in Alabama, we've had a couple of starts at creating an AHEC, but it has never been embraced by the local political figures in order to mount the local match and even going beyond that to meet the outcomes that AHEC is supposed to do. And so it has become thought of as just a grant funding mechanism to try to bring some federal dollars into Alabama. And so that's been the outcome people were looking for, not looking for the outcome of getting rural people to become rural physicians. And so that's been the problem with AHECs here. We do have an AHEC, but you hear not much of it. And well, you've already seen my attitude toward it.
I'm very intrigued by John's cycle of the pipeline and the community being in the center. And there is a question, can you speak more to how family engagement occurs? Do you invite parents to events and such, or is there more to it than that?
In a very practical sense, when we invite the students to come up to start their summer program, the parents come with them. And when the students are oriented to the program, the parents are there. After the program's over, parents are coming up and telling us this, that, and the other. And one of my favorite anecdotes is the young woman from down in Southeast Alabama who was there, and she was accompanied by 2 older brothers. And one of them had played football for Auburn, and one of them had played football for someplace else. And they were Husky guys, and they took me aside and they said, Doc, if anything happens to so-and-so during this time that's up here, we're not going to come looking for the University of Alabama. We're going to come looking for you. And so there's this kind of pride that the families have in their students, and also in the opportunity that these programs represent to their kids. These kids would not have these kind of promotional activities for them that's promoting their dreams at this early age and on in through medical school. And so the parents are highly engaged. Parents then end up telling us about I talked to Mr. So-and-so, who is our legislator, about this, and so on. And I know that the head of the Farm Federation in our community has a big influence down there with the president, and they have a big, and so the families begin to feel like, they are carrying this program that is their program. This is a program that is combating a little bit the opportunities that have gotten away from them and that seem to be opportunities for urban kids. But this is something that if they support, and so they get behind it. Now, they also say, Dr. Wheat, you should know that that we've got a great farming outfit down here. Be a great place for you to bring the kids and let them see how the health of the community is affected by. And so they help arrange experiences like that, and they recruit, and they go back and they say, I need to start looking for other kids. So that's my practical viewpoint of it.
I want to flip that around, because you're talking about the very grassroots level, which seems to be critical. And then there's a question in the chat, and I actually echoed the thoughts that I had about, where are the intervention points, in a state or in a region of a state. And so you focused on counties in your in the paper that you presented. And, I know sometimes counties and school districts are, overlapping. But I often think about this work happening in school districts, and sometimes they don't, and it depends on what state you're in. I also think about, like workforce development councils, which may or may not be counties in some states. And of course, there's the state level with education funding. So there's a lot of different leverage points. And I wondered if you could talk about, what it is about counties, or how you would work with county folks and in your state, or what advice you'd give to folks.
Well, they're county commissioners, they're mayors, they're probate judges, there are school superintendents, as you mentioned, there's civic clubs, there's ministers, there's farm bureau representatives, there's doctors. It's it's not because they're in this position they're influential, but because they're in this position they're influential. I mean, people put them in that position because of their influence. Now, not all of these guys are interested in what we're interested in, but some of them are. And those that are, they need to be contacted. They don't have the information that we have. They don't have the data that I am presenting, but there's those in rural communities that are very concerned about the future of their rural communities. They have been watching decay in many of these communities for years and years. And they're committed to living there. Their livelihood is there. They want, if not their kids, they want other kids in the community to be successful there. And so if they find that there is a partner that will help them put together a strategy that will help improve the livelihood and the health of their community, they want to be involved. Now, it's like my old now deceased father-in-law once said, and he grew up in rural Alabama and was there all his life. And I did too, except for the little time I spent at the university now. But he says, John, he says, in any small community, there's got to be 4 first-class funerals before a young person can get anywhere, okay? So it behooves us to learn who are those first-class funerals that need to be had in the future, and go talk to those people and get them on your side. And it is very grassroots, and each community has a different way of doing things. So you can't cookie cut how to do this, but you need to have a process that says, I'm going to find a way to locate these people. And they may not listen to me, but they will listen to other people in the community that are important to them. And so we have to have communication methods. And certainly our practicing physicians in the community are very important in that regard. The hospital administrators are. And then because this is at heart an educational process, the educators in the community are. Those are 3 very big places to start. And surprisingly, the farmers in these communities have had a greater impact on our programs and support farm than any other group. because they are stuck there and they're not stuck. They love being there. This is their livelihood. They like it, and they want it to stay robust and active. And so they want doctors there. So anyway, I hope that helps.
Randy, you're muted. Turning it back to Randy.
Randy, you are muted. Oh, here we go.
I know it took a while for me to figure out how to unmute myself. Well, this has been great. We've had so many questions in the chat that we haven't gotten to, and I've made a promise to folks that we'll give you a chance, John, to answer a few of those, and then we'll distribute those to the people that attended today, if you'll agree to that. I want people to know that we do record these and that they are available on our website, at the Rural Prep website. And so please go there for this recording. Hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we'll have that uploaded. And then just to bring your attention to future events, we'll be having our next professional development webinar in May. Haven't yet finalized the topic. And if you have ideas or things that you think we should discuss, please let us know. And we'll be restarting our Rural Prep Grand Rounds in January with a presentation by Diane Rollman from Iowa on practical tools for promoting farm safety. Folks can participate in Rural Prep Grand Rounds as a site or as a group, and we invite you to do that. We do want to hear your evaluation and comments, feedbacks on today's webinar. So please follow the link that's in the chat window or typing this address into your browser. If you have specific questions for us in Rural Prep, you're free to ask. You're also free to address John and asking him some specific questions that you may have in follow-up of today's presentation. With that, I'm going to stop speaking. Is there anything else, John or Davis, that you'd like to say?
Let me say that I apologize for the delay in getting up and running. I am a little bit behind the times in this technology, but I have really enjoyed the opportunity to talk and to answer questions. And I look forward to communications with any of you that find this to be a topic that you'd like to discuss more with.
And I'd take John at his word. He flashed his email address up there, and I know he would love to hear from you. So I really appreciate getting the benefit of your long experience in this area. And I have many questions that I want to continue talking with you about myself. So thank you, John. And just for the record, we tested it and we know that you did it, that it all worked at the beginning before the webinar started. But isn't that how things go sometimes? So, but thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
And I will say one other thing, and that is that there was a question raised about, so what do we do locally? What are some things that we can do locally? And I think we at Rural Prep will put a little thought into a response to that particular question, because it's all about starting where you are, but keeping the big picture in mind. So act locally, but think and collaborate globally, like John suggested. So thank you again for attending, and have a good holiday and new year full of hope. Well, I think it's just us left.
Yeah, we're keeping this up probably in one more minute until all
Okay.
of this have left, and probably copy hopefully the webinar evaluation link.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, John, for doing this today. That was a great topic, very popular, lots of interest in this. And so if you will, take a crack at answering some questions. We'll send you the chat, and you can pick and choose. What we'll do is we'll just send this out to our mailing list then of the people who participated today. And,
I would love to, Randy, and thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to share my experience. It's been really worthwhile to me.
yeah,
Thank you.
excellent. Thank you so much, and have a good holiday.
Okay, you do too.
JP, I'm going to sign
Yep.
off.
Okay, thank you.
All right.